Good afternoon, one and all. Marta and I were having a right old bop away with the music on there, weren't we, Marta? Yeah, we're styling it out, weren't we? So James here, Marta alongside me as well. Marta's going to be on the chat and the questions. If you're on the hub page, you can type a question in and we will answer it here on the camera for you. So do that. We just did an OCR A-Level exercise physiology session and the interaction from the community was really, really great. It really helped the session, so do ask your questions. Now, a couple of reminders. Please help us out. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button on the video, whether you're watching this live or on demand sometime after. Obviously, we're doing this on Monday night. What time is it right now? 5:45 in the evening. And we're looking forward to a great session. You should have in front of you, hopefully, your notes pages. You should have your practice questions, your mark schemes, and your model answers. Can I please stress that we updated and replaced some questions on the practice questions? So if you got the ones we first published a little while back, we made a mess up. And instead of putting types of practice, we put methods of practice. We've since updated that, and the updated one is the one we're going to be covering in this session. So just in case you've got the older version, that's why there's going to be a little bit of a mismatch. So apologies for any confusion. But that's what we're going to be doing. Reminder to all you teachers out there that you have, if you're not a current user of the EverLearner.com, you can get a 28-day free trial for your students leading up to the exams, including Exam Simulator. Get involved. Go to the website and hit free trial, and then you can get some really great use out for the students in the wrong side, for the students in the last few days leading to the exam. Now, this afternoon session, we're expecting it to be in the region of about 45 minutes content, maybe 10-15 minutes of Q&A, okay? So overall, it should be about an hour's session. So if you're in school and you've got to plan your lift home or whatever, around about an hour, that's what we think. Marta, have I missed anything? Is there anything to check in about before we get cracking?
I don't think so, no. Just encourage students to send us their questions if they've got any. Remember, through the chat on the hub page.
Thank you very much. With that in mind then, we're going to get cracking. We're going to get straight away into types of practice. Here's a little tricky bit for me. Here we go. Okay, let's jump into this. So first thing I want to do with this depiction of what we've got on the screen here is I just want to clarify what a T is. A T equals a trial. So it's important we've got that concept. Okay, so a T equals a trial. And when we're talking about a trial, we're talking about something like it's a particular repetition of a skill performance. So let's imagine I'm doing that sort of fundamental practice in basketball of shooting free throws over and over again, which of course would be an excellent example of mass practice. This would be where this is a shot. This is a shot. Hopefully those, I just realised my arrows are not appearing because I'm on the wrong canvas, but this here is a shot, this here is a shot, this here is a shot. And you see, there's no break between these trials except for the fact of retrieving another ball from the basket or wherever it happens to be. You know, you've often probably got a big sort of open basket of carrying basket next to you of balls, and you shoot, you shoot, you shoot, you shoot, you shoot. Often, we'll even try and eliminate or decrease this period, and we'll do that by having something like an assistant or a partner feeding the ball back, even a machine like some kind of table tennis serving robot or tennis serving robot or whatever it happens to be that's eliminating that time in between the trials that naturally occur in time. But what we'd say here is that this includes no breaks, okay? No breaks. By the way, my pen for some reason has got a little delay when the colour appears on the screen for me, so if it looks like a little bit jerky, it's why, all right? So there we go. Now, we've got our definition here. We're saying repeated trials of the skill with no breaks in between. Or you could say here, I mean, I wouldn't actually reference this at all in your answer, but you just say no breaks in between. But obviously, we know that there's a kind of natural break. You know, imagine if you're hitting golf shots, for example, on the driving range, which is a good example of mass practice, is you've got you've got to get the ball back on the tee or onto the artificial bit of grass or whatever it happens to be, right? There's that little bit of time. Now, let's evaluate this thing. And can I stress to you folks that our job when it comes to one of our types of practice is to evaluate it. Now, we can evaluate it just purely, but we can also evaluate it in the context. So, of course, mass practice is going to be a far more ideal practice type in some context, some sporting activities, some sporting skills than another. So, of course, it's got different strengths and weaknesses depending on what it is that we're trying to practice. But let's look at the evaluation as a whole. First of all, it maximizes practice time. I think this is a fundamentally important point. Why? Because if we take this period of time as this is X amount of time, we are getting as many T's into there as possible, aren't we? So we are maximizing the pure repetition of this. Now that could be really good if you think about like your operant conditioning type theories, couldn't it? You know, effectively trial and error learning. You're presented with a stimulus and you try and you attempt a particular response, and that is done over and over again. It's excellent for discrete, closed, self-paced skills. So let's have a little think about this. Discrete skills are those with a clear beginning and end. Now, discrete skills don't have to be short periods of time, but they often are. So because it's got a clear beginning and end, we can go from here to here to here, right? So we can do that clear beginning and end, therefore we can start another skill. You couldn't, for example, do mass practice for cycling, really, right? Because the pedal turns are continuous. Closed skills, really, really good closed skills, because if you notice at the end of every one of these trials, there's then a result. So if you do some kind of closed skill, let's say it's our basketball free throw, in that sense, you're getting a result at the end of this every single time. And self-paced skills, in other words, what we're finding here is these are not in sort of an open environment where something else is dictating the start and the timing and the order of things. Here, it's the participant that's deciding that. So again, we're thinking about, I'm going to stick with that example, my practicing free throws over and over again. Now, we're saying, I've said already, it's really good for operant conditioning because we get lots of trials in our trial and error learning. It's brilliant, and this is an essential term for you, it's brilliant for overlearning an essential skill. So if there is a fundamental skill within a sport, I'll go back to one sport I play, table tennis. Let's go back to serving in table tennis, which is not a super sort of powerful action just as it is in tennis, for example, so you don't need the breaks in between. So if we want to overlearn a particular serve, we would use mass practice, and it's really good for fitness development. Now notice it's developing fitness. That means if we're not fit already, this could be quite challenging, more of which in a second. Now on the negative side, there's no feedback enabled. So in other words, we're essentially doing this with knowledge of results only. So we're not going to have a coach next to us, or we're not going to have video playback where we're getting knowledge of performance and we're getting that kind of, we might get some intrinsic feedback, obviously depending on the nature of the skill, but there's a lack of breaks, so extrinsic feedback is going to be limited. It's physically challenging. Now this is not necessarily bad. It could be bad. It could be good. Now, we've already said it depends who your group is. So if I've put 3 O's in there. If it's the fact that you're playing novices, or your question is asking about someone who's recovering for injury, then of course this is going to be a bad way of doing it. If it's going to be you're working with elite performers, this could be actually quite positive, coming back to that sort of fitness development point. It's no good for high intensity movements. Okay, so anything which is going to be sort of utilized in an ATPPC system is going to naturally require breaks in between, and it requires motivation. Okay, so children, for example, might negatively be affected by this because they need some other kind of stimulation. Okay, so in other words, there we've done a neat evaluation of that mass practice. Now, of course, one of the alternative types of practice is distributed. Now, remember, your T is a trial, and those little dashes are stops. You need to start noticing we've got practice time, break. We've got practice time,
we've got break, and of course that would continue over and over again. So the question we've got to ask ourselves is, what are these breaks for? What will we use those for? And I'm sure that you can sort of consider some possibilities, but we've got the inclusion of breaks between trials. I mean, we might want to say some trials there. I think that would be a reasonable thing to say, because you notice we're not stopping after every trial. We've got little blocks of 4 and then breaks in between, and we'll come back to that in a second. So you might want to just consider that. It's not like stopping after every attempt. That wouldn't be efficient. So breaks can be used for coaching, feedback, guidance. So first of all, coaching is a generic term, effectively a coach engaging with an athlete. But feedback, of course, is a specific term. Guidance is a specific term. You could be talking here about a coach having the opportunity to use visual guidance. That visual guidance could relate to, for example, video overlays, or it could be a video annotation of the performance. The breaks can be used for psychological processes such as visualization or goal setting. So again, recognizing the value of mental preparation, that's a real positive for distributed practice. Distributed practice gives us the opportunity for other non-physical but psychological processes. Let's name imagery. Let's name deep breathing. Let's go for positive self-talk. But more importantly, the coach can actually engage with the athlete on that one. It's really good for high intensity skills. Why? It's good for high intensity skills because we've got that break period. In other words, there's recovery. I mean, you can literally call this recovery. Okay, that's more of a physiological term, but why not? It's the same concept, isn't it? So we've got another point here. Good for less motivated performers. So I mean, this is what you're going to write in your exam. I've got sort of mixed feelings about this. I would sort of say, to start with, so if we take a skill that could be done with mass practice and we do it distributed because our learners don't want to be there, of course, we've got to change the fact that the learners don't want to be there, haven't we? So to start with, we might use distributed practice and then we might move on. But of course, in our evaluation, there are numerous negatives to this distributed practice. So what are those negatives? First of all, it's less time efficient overall. So in essence, if you were to measure the number of T's, I mean, feel free to count them up. There should be fewer T's here than in our mass practice above. In fact, I've got 12 here, and I don't know how many I've got over here. Am I actually going to count them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You've got 16. So it's more efficient, more trials per unit of time in mass practice, right? That's what we're talking about. Don't take that too literally. Don't put in you get 12 with distributed and you get 16 with mass. That's just me depicting stuff, right? Breaks can become a distraction. So you keep getting stopped. I mean, think about that in your own practice environment. It gets a bit annoying, doesn't it, right? I'm on a roll here. I want to keep practicing. I'm hitting some shots, whatever. And someone keeps stopping you. Go, right, let me tell you some stuff. No, this is distracting. We want to get on with it. I want to keep that rhythm going. The opposite of that is the case if you need feedback, right? If it's not going so well, or for whatever reason you need information, then of course the breaks are useful. And elite performers may want fewer stops. So if you're sort of working with autonomous stage learners, let's remind ourselves of what the key term for our sort of elite performers is. Our autonomous stage learners. They want to get on with it. Okay. Now that isn't to say that autonomous stage learners don't like feedback. They do. In fact, they particularly like negative feedback. But autonomous stage learners, of course, they're going to be wanting to maximize their practice time. So there's our distributed. Now let's go into fixed practice. Now we're moving into a different sort of notion here. Fixed and then a second variable. This is the types of practice, of course, but this is now linking into how you actually set up the practice environment. Okay, so it's more closely related to that. So it's a stable, predictable practice. Now, from looking at these words, you should already know what kind of skills fixed practice is going to be used for. And its practice conditions remain unchanging. So again, this should tell you what our fixed practice is going to be used for. So let's move into our evaluation. That's what we're going to do. Now, by the way, another skill you might just want to sort of be aware of other than evaluation is you might be asked to justify the use of, let's say, massed practice for a particular skill. So it's still an AO3 skill, but you're justifying why you would choose mass practice over other practice types for a particular skill. So it's not a bad thing to be aware of. So by far the most important point here is that fixed practices are brilliant for closed skills. So anything where there is a non-changing environment, terms we tend to use with closed skills are They are our habitual skills, okay, that we do them the same over and over again. They don't need to be adapted. Therefore, we'd practice them in a fixed practice. Now, we've chosen the example of a javelin thrower here. Why? Because when they throw the javelin, the conditions are the same. Yes, it could be that you're at slightly higher altitude. Yes, it could be that it's raining on a day. Yes, it could be that it's more slippery or slightly different track surface underfoot. Those things do not change within the performance. The performance of the 6 throws in the competition are identical. Hopefully, brilliant world record throws, whatever. But that's the point we're trying to make here. The environment is stable and predictable. You run down that approach, you get 2 to 3 meters from the line, you throw, you try and stop before the line, you watch where the thing lands. That's what they do each and every time. So it's good for close skills. It's unlikely to be confusing or to overwhelm the performer. So we're not likely to get information overload here. So if I use IO as information overload, we are not going to get that with fixed practice, because we're not going to introduce the javelin thrower to, hey, let's do this while standing on a medicine ball. No, I mean, there's no point. Okay, it's not how it is. Let's do this with defenders in our way. No, for numerous reasons. Doing that javelin, there's no point. It doesn't work that way. Now, it's excellent for basic techniques before learning. So I want to put a term in for you. Can I just say that term I said before? It's really good for over-learning skills. So I don't know why this one springs to mind, but I think of passing backwards and forwards with the instep in football, right? Okay, that's an absolutely essential skill in football, but we can't keep it in this fixed environment because it's an open skill within the performance. But we can over-learn the basic technique that way, and that's what you might be finding. It's really good for drilling, over-learning the basic fundamental technique of something. Now, these are negative as well. They're ineffective with open and complex skills. So anything which involves any performance, especially games related things, anything that involves a lot of kind of perceptual processes, this is no good. It doesn't encourage adaptability. So adaptability, remember, that really links to our schema theory. Adaptability is not going to be built through fixed practice. You're going to get the same performance over and over again with little errors and changes here and there, I suppose. And it's a very narrow range of experiences. So without wanting to offend any kind of javelin throwers or whatever, it can get quite boring, right? It's the same thing over and over again. And I guess it therefore, this is perhaps why we tend to find that many individual sports and close skills, it tends to, by the way, I don't mean to call these people boring, that's not my point, but where we might find more introverted characters and less extroverted characters, because less sort of, I'm not going to get into a reticular activating system, but there's less actual stimulation required for those individuals. Now, variable practice, and look out also simply for the term varied practice, which, by the way, I would argue is actually the correct term. But anyway, variable practice, it's skill practiced in a changing environment. Now, we can already see from our hockey example here that the skills need to be adapted. There's a changed environment. We need broad schema, okay, for certain things, broad schema for certain things, because the environment changes all the time. These are variable practice environments. So we do it with open and complex skills. I put back that term to you, lots of perceptual processes. Here's my term, perceptual skills. So anything that involves us judging the environment and acting on it, of course, that's going to link very, very neatly here to us. We've got the performance experience decision making, similar to the real situation. Now, we could also call this near transfer. Okay, it's not a term we actually use on this course, but if you want to chuck it in, it will get you a mark on a mark scheme. Near transfer, it basically means you train and practice like the match, train and practice like the competition. It broadens our schema. I've already mentioned that. The broader the schema is, the more adaptable the skill is, and it's more sort of satisfying. It prevents boredom. In other words, it's more stimulating. But there are negatives in our as ever evaluation. Could be that we're justifying this for a particular skill. So what have we got here? It can be overwhelming. So information overload, I mentioned it before, it can be a lot to process in a practice environment. It depends on the stage of the learner, of course. It's no good for closed skills, apart from the example we've talked about already. In fact, we haven't talked about any, or I talked about open skills within fixed practice. That's a different thing. Skills may need to be learned before being practiced in varied scenarios. So we might find what we get is we actually get fixed first. Go back to my passing in football example, and then we get our variable. Okay, so again, remember the role of this. This here is to overlearn the essential skill first. Okay, let's take this forward, and what we're going to do here is do a couple of questions. We've got a question here of discuss the effectiveness of using mass practice for a trampoline. Now, in this case, this question, and only some of the mark scheme appears on this particular image, you should have it in front of you, hopefully, the whole thing. But the discuss command here is broadly speaking asking you to evaluate. Now, it might feel strange that we've got a question which is kind of hiding another command, but it's asking us to discuss the effectiveness of using mass practice for trampolines. So it's basically saying, when is it good, when is it bad? So we've got mass practice would cause trampolinists to develop sport-specific fitness. So it's really good for fitness, such as power. If you name the type of the component of fitness here that would be useful, and it will save time due to the absence of breaks. So the other term we can put here is it's time efficient. Okay, it's a time-efficient practice. Mass is also good for closed skills. We agree, which trampolining is. So it's linking trampolining as a closed skill. However, mass leaves no time for feedback. So now we're going into our negative side. So if you were to go back up here, I mean, without meaning to be too sort of basic about it, we've gone over this first, and then we're going to go over this in our answer, right? That is what we're talking about. And it's why we make these images for you. All those images above, they're professionally designed so that you can do this in the exam, right? Of course, you've got to apply it to the example. In this case, we've got trampolining. No time for coach feedback or other processes such as mentor rehearsal. I mean, this is a good This is a good answer as well. And finally, mass can cause fatigue, which could cause technique to deteriorate. So in other words, it's tiring. You know, you've got to build breaks into some skills, but effectively that's what we've done there. Now, the second question relates to mass as well, but this time we're explaining how both mass and distributed practice could be used within a volleyball training session. So it's asking us to pick up two mechanisms, massed again and distributed, and saying, okay, well, how does this relate to volleyball? So we've got massed involves repeated trials with no breaks. We're just saying what that is. So it's just an A at 1 point. And we're saying that could be used for repeated serving with a trolley full of balls. So we're just hitting serve after serve after serve. But notice I'm being specific to volleyball. I'm getting credit, for knowing that in volleyball, serving is an important skill. And then I've got here, when there are breaks between trials for distributed, and this could be practice match in training, a practice match where there would be breaks between sets. Okay, so what we've said here is, okay, we would use mass practice for kind of like honing a technique, and then distributing practice when we put that into a more open situation. Now it's kind of interesting here because we're starting to link the notions of massed and fixed, and we're starting to link distributed and variable. Well, that's quite interesting. Now that link is not always there, but it is often the case. And again, we pick up 4 marks for that particular answer. Okay, I'm just going to take a moment just to sip my drink, and then we'll be straight back with this section. Oh dear, lovely sip of my tea there. Why is tea so nice? Why is it such a... Anyway, maybe I should be encouraging you to get into caffeine. Okay, let's look at our stage of learning. Of course, we're talking about there being 3 stages of learning: cognitive, associative, and autonomous. And what I'm going to do here is, of course, I'm going to take you through the characteristics of each. You must know the characteristics. I'm going to get you to note these down and work on these, quite a lot of them actually. But then we're going to link it to feedback. So I really want to focus on this link to feedback. So let's get into this. First of all, we're saying a cognitive, a novice, a beginner. There are many errors. Okay, I've got my little bit of drag on my pen, which is annoying. We're talking about what I'm going to call T&E, trial and error learning. Now, we've already talked about that a little bit when it comes to that sort of notion of fixed practice. They require extrinsic feedback. So extrinsic feedback is really important to these. Now, obviously, we want to look at types of feedback in a second, but the main point here is that they do not have a kinesthetic intrinsic sense of the overall. In fact, let's put that in: lack of intrinsic feedback. They don't know what correct and incorrect feeling of the skill actually is like, so therefore that lack of intrinsic requires that extrinsic is done. It requires conscious thought. So, you know, we've in this stage, we've literally got to go, right, put the left foot here, hold the grip in this way, right, put my weight on my back foot, right, now hit the thing. Now, okay, that I don't know why I was thinking about golf there, but that would be the kind of thing that we mean by conscious thought. You actually have to talk yourself through. Now, if you play a sport, let's say like badminton, and then you switch your racket, let's say from your right hand to your left hand, or your left hand to the right hand, and try and play it there. Yeah, you might be able to hit a few shots, but you'll have to talk yourself through the technique because you've taken yourself back to that to that cognitive stage. We tend to find that the technique is jerky or it lacks fluency is a nice way of put that. We also want to say here that the motor program begins to form. So I'll put starts to form. Start, spelled better than that. To form. My pen delay is really getting to me here. Starts to form. We're going to say that because of this we have narrow schema, so our skill will not be adaptable at this point. It's nice and basic. We need a mental image. I knew I should have made these boxes bigger. We need a mental image as a cognitive stage learner, and all that together is going to mean, let me just change colour slightly so we can see it differently on the back. That's going to lead to inconsistency. So can I be clear that those are the characteristics of the cognitive stage learner? Now, none of those, apart from the two we've made explicitly, they don't relate to feedback. So this is what I want you to be aware of with the cognitive stage learner and feedback. So really important points here. We know that this question is likely to be on your paper. So we want to say that positive is most effective for this stage. So what we're saying here is that for cognitive stage learners, it's kind of good to find the things that they're doing well. If we give lots of negative feedback, lots of technical processes, could be criticism, that's not going to be effective. So positive is the most effective. Think about the importance of praise for a beginner. So we want to have less down arrow negative. So not too much negative feedback. Now that coaching points could be incorporated, of course, and should be incorporated, but negative feedback, we want down arrow less of it. Why? Because it can decrease confidence. We still, however, want coaching points. That's a no. We still want coaching points. So to be clear, it's true that we're not going to give too much negative feedback, criticism, but we are going to give negative feedback in the form of coaching points. Hey, if you did this better, the ball might go in. Okay, so or if you change your grip, you'll find that the shots are more consistent. This is good things. They're coaching points. Yes, technically it's negative feedback. But anyway, and too much feedback is overwhelming. Overwhelming for my pen. Okay, so that's how we'd link the cognitive stage learner to feedback. Now let's get into our associative. Often the phase that people sort of struggle with a little bit, because it's sort of in the middle and all that, we call this the practice stage, okay? So it's the practice stage. Secondly, and obviously we'll link this to feedback in a few minutes' time, we get up arrow or increased fluency. So the skill becomes more fluent, which is useful, unlike my pen tip at the moment. We get more T&E learning, so more trial and error. Trial and error continues in another way of saying things. Now, I really like this one. The performer, but now can match. The performer is now able to match the model to the requirements. So let's have a think about this. If I'm learning, let's say, passing in netball, or let's say bounce passing in netball, by the practice stage, I can actually match the actual model of the skill of bounce passing to when it's required to get the ball into a well-defended goal shooter in the D. I can start to understand why that actually needs to happen. I can link those things. We get EMPs, your executive motor programs. They are now stored in your long-term memory. So in other words, the motor programs are actually stored in the LTM. We now get broader schema. So our schema, which make our skills adaptable, remember, they are now stored better and more broadly. And we're also now able to use different types of feedback. Use feedback, and I'll come back to this in a second. And it's all about the different types that we're interested in now. And this is a really important point. We get kinesthesis beginning to develop. And of course, kinesthesis is the thing that enables intrinsic feedback to be positive. So let's look at how this links to feedback. So specifically how this links to feedback. So intrinsic begins. Intrinsic begins. Okay, so we've now got the intrinsic is actually available to this particular performer. So a really nice way of doing this is that KOP linked to intrinsic, KOP linked to extrinsic is very useful. So let's just think about that a second. what we're saying there is that knowledge of performance, which again, think about things such as it's technique based, it could be specifically related to the shoulder level of shoulder extension, or the particular placement of the feet. This can now be linked to extrinsic feedback. So the coach can now be given very detailed feedback. For example, look at this video playback. I've noticed here that your feet are just out of position. In your next go, I want you to do it like this. And of course, because we've now got a little bit of intrinsic in there, the actual performer and associative should recognize this. So we've now got negative is useful. I don't know. My tablet's talking to me. I use my tablet for where my notes are, and I think it's sort of picked up that I'm trying to talk to it, and I'm not. I tried to turn that off. So negative is now useful, okay? So, and this particularly useful for error correction. And what I mean by that is that we use negative feedback. The coach would use, look, I've spotted this mistake, this is how to correct it. And that's useful in this stage. Now, let's do our last stage, which is our autonomous stage learner. We're talking about some really interesting terms here. We're talking about accurate. You can almost go back to the characteristics of skill, really. Accurate, grooved skill. Grooved is a very similar term to overlearned. It's honed. Similar sort of notion. It's guess what? It's overlearned. All these phrases will pick you up credit. It's a fluent skill. It's an efficient skill. Remember, no waste of time or energy or both. It's an efficient skill. It requires little thought, or it's not conscious, or it's automatic, we could say. Hence the autonomous, really, right? And they're really benefiting here from intrinsic type feedback. So I'm just going to put intrinsic in there. Now let's take this into how this links to feedback again. What are we talking about here? We are talking specifically about the importance of intrinsic. So intrinsic feedback, critical. Okay, so this is what you want to build your coaching environment on, is intrinsic feedback. We really want to up the levels of the knowledge of performance, serving attention, right? We videoed you. I'll keep using the video as an example. It doesn't have to be that, but we videoed you. We've got all of your performance stats for this particular practice session. We've noticed that your ball toss is higher today by 2.7 centimeters, and we noticed that this has reduced your first serve accuracy by 7.2%. So we want you in the next batch of 100 serves, we want you to toss the ball with less height. You know, that is what we're talking about with knowledge performance. That's what athletes should be able to achieve. But this is an important one. KOR is how they judge themselves. So, they judge themselves. So, let's make no bones about it. Autonomous learners judge themselves largely by winning and losing, success and failure. Yes, they've got their they've got their process goals, more of which in a second, but they judge themselves on outcomes. So it's actually important to sort of build that in as well. And also now we could say positive is no longer that important, not that important. What we'll find generally with elite performers is they're not really interested in praise, they're interested in feedback, tell me what to do better. And that's a really nice thing to remember. So that's how we'd link this to feedback. Now let's go forward, state 3 characteristics of a performer in the associative stage. So real simple, trial and error continues, external feedback, beginning to use kinesthetic feedback, fewer errors are made. So we've got those points already. That's nice and simple. Just stating things, but this is the evaluate the use of extrinsic feedback for cognitive stage learners. So we've been given extrinsic and we've been given a stage of learner. So what are we saying here? We're saying that the cognitive stage learner does not yet have a kinesthetic sense. Therefore, extrinsic feedback is really useful. It helps them to create a mental picture. Think about like seeing something like here. Let me help you with this. Let me demonstrate. If the learner respects the coach, this method will be more effective. Okay, so it depends who the coach is. We're also saying there are negatives because the associative learner can be easily overloaded with too much information. And another negative is that a lot of feedback or too much feedback can get in the way of our trial and error learning. Now, we're almost touching on mass practice there, aren't we? The time becomes less efficient because we do less practicing. But notice I'm evaluating. I'm saying why this is good and bad for this. Okay, so there's our evaluation. I think we've got one more to do. Same notion. Evaluate, negative, elite. So is this good or bad? So we're saying they want to know what to do to improve. I love this phrase here. Marginal gains can have a big impact at elite level. Okay, so the fact that they're receiving negative criticism and they're getting information on what is not perfect yet, that allows a marginal gain. Elite athletes are not driven by praise, so they actually want negative feedback. They want that kind of like, what do I do to improve? Only the very best coaches will have the technical knowledge, so this is negative. So like you were talking about the real elite of elite here, right? Because if you're working with an autonomous stage learner and you're trying to make them better, you've got to know your stuff, right? And finally, it can be expensive and scientific. So there's a couple of drawbacks in there, and we're able to evaluate in that way. But notice, positive and negatives of negative for this kind of performer. Is this the kind of question that we're going to get picked up in the exam? Now, another one I'd just say to you, right? Imagine you got a question in the exam which was to simply analyse the different. I don't know what I'm going to say here. Types. Analyse the different stages of learning and how they relate to feedback. Use supporting examples to support your answer, something like that, how they relate to feedback. So it's a very open question now. We're basically saying analyze is kind of like break it into parts and tell me everything and explain everything. So analyze the different stages of learning. So I've got 3 stages and how they relate to feedback. Now, it's not a very good question, but this could easily be an 8-marker, folks. Okay, because you'd have to then go through cognitive and feedback, the characteristics of cognitive stage learners, then feedback. The characteristics of associative, then feedback. The characteristics of autonomous and feedback. It could easily be an 8-mark question. Now, I've written that off the cover. I'm not saying it's a well-structured question, but you could have a go at that, right? And you could have a go at answering that, and that would also allow you to represent all of the knowledge that we've covered here. Okay, break time.
And we're back. Marta, how was that? Any questions, any thoughts?
Yes, there are a few questions. The first thing I need to mention, fixed practice, James. What's happened with fixed practice? Some people are saying it's not in the spec.
Okay, so fixed practice is not named directly on the specification, but it's absolutely critical, the point I'm going to make here. There's 2 reasons I would cover fixed practice in this situation. Reason 1 is it's effectively the inverse or the opposite side of variable. So what we find as weaknesses and strengths of variable are the opposite of fixed, therefore it's useful to look at it for that reason. The other one is that in the past, and especially on previous specifications, that AQA haven't questioned variable practice yet on this specification, but on previous ones, fixed has been a feature in a mark scheme, not a question. So I would hazard a guess there is no chance whatsoever of you getting a question on fixed, but a knowledge of fixed could be relevant to a mark scheme, potentially on the other types of practice, hence just its inclusion. I should have clarified that earlier on, apologies.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And why is the link between stages of learning and feedback so important?
Okay, that's a really important point. If we look at the specification in detail, the specification, when we look at stage of learning, specifically references the link with feedback, and of course that has come through in the AEI. So when you're preparing to write questions on stage of learning, of course by definition you need to then be incorporating the links between that and feedback, and hence me covering it in that format that way. Try to be as comprehensive as possible with that, so you've got a really robust understanding.
Brilliant. And why do elite performance like negative feedback?
Okay, that's a really good question. The person that asked that. So it kind of feels counterintuitive. People who are really good want negative feedback. So I'm going to answer this in 2 ways. The second is sort of an anecdotal one, but the first thing we just want to reference is that elite performers, autonomous stage learners, they are already confident in the main. They already know that they can perform. They're already a, say, professional, an Olympian, whatever it happens to be, right? They don't need someone saying to them, well done, you're good at this. What they need to know is you could be slightly better if. So that's what we mean by negative feedback. Remember, negative feedback is not something cruel. It can be something very constructive. Let's see if we can shave 0.1 of a second off that dive start by positioning the weight slightly more forward after we've used the force plate sensor. This is what we would call negative feedback. It's critical to the performance, especially if it's knowledge of performance based, right? That KOP is really valuable because we can look at the intricacies of performance, achieve marginal gains, and marginal gains at elite level can make massive difference. I saw a stat once, which was, I want to say it was in the 2012 Olympics, but it might have been the 2008, was that if you take the men's and the women's 100, 200, 110 meter hurdles for the men, 100 meter hurdles for the women, the 400 meter hurdles for both men and women, and you looked at the differences between the person who finished first and second across all of those races combined was less than 1 second. And that's why, your eyes perhaps went there, Marta. And that's why negative feedback is for elite performance, because shaving off a tenth matters, and that's why they want to do that. So that's that. The only other one I would say is that you've answered that is there's a beautiful bit of research. I can't remember the author of the research now off the top of my head. There's a beautiful bit of research that researched the link between the number of falls, this is falling over in practice for ice skater, to medal winning performances. And I want you to think about what you think the correlation of that might be. Was it that the fewer falls you have in practice correlates to the most successful performers, or was it actually what the output was, which is that athletes who fell over more in practice achieved higher when it came to actually Olympic and world level results? So there's actually some research on that. So in other words, let's push to the limits, find the faults and correct them. Then when we go to perform, we should be at the peak. And that's, I think, anecdotally why negative feedback is quite useful. Well, the most important type of feedback for elite performers. Sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded answer. I hope that's reasonable.
Yeah. Brilliant, I think. Yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
Really good.
Okay, any more, Marta, before we move on?
No more questions so far, no.
Well,
please do send them in during the second half.
So good news to you younglings. This second section will be significantly shorter than the well, hopefully. We're only going to cover here learning plateaus and goal setting, and then we're going to have a little look at the 15 marker that you've probably had to go in your practice questions. And I think it's really, 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 really vital that we focus on this. I don't know if the learning plateau is going to be part of the 15 marker. They could well link goal setting to a non-skill acquisition topic on paper one. It's perfectly plausible. Goal setting is certainly going to be on paper one. But, and I think it's going to be in a 15 mark question too, but what I've tried to do here is assemble a really relevant question that really could be quite similar to what might come up. Let's see if we can cover it. Do learning plateaus, do goal setting, and then the 15 marker. Here we go. So absolutely critical that we get this section right. Okay, folks, I've tried to be sort of very accurate and technical here, and I'll tell you why. I don't know if the learning plateau stuff is going to be linked with goal setting. Obviously, I think you'll have looked at that question already. When it comes to the 15 marker, maybe a bit synoptic. I don't know, folks. We know that goal setting is a paper 2 topic, was included in paper 1. That obviously strongly suggests that's going to be a synoptically linked, probably 15 marker, right? 15 marker. Therefore, I've looked at things like stage of learning. I've looked at things like the types of practice. Yeah, they could easily be in the 15 marker. Very, very possible. But I personally feel that learning plateau is one that A, links beautifully with goal setting. But secondly, I really strongly feel it's something that can be taught better and understood better. And therefore, hence, we want to really try and be accurate. My job here is to make sure that you can understand it pictorially descripted. I want to make sure that you understand the causes of a learning plateau. And I want to make sure that you can write about the solutions or shortening or preventing. This is where your marks are going to come from, okay, folks? So, first things first, I just want us to be able to analyse the shape of a curve. What we've got here is performance quality on the y-axis and the number of trials on the x-axis, okay? So obviously, in this initial stage of learning from here to here, let's say this is trials 1 to 10, there's not much learning. We're not getting much acceleration in the process of learning, right? But then between sort of the 10th trial, let's say, and the 5th year trial, we get this kind of model of learning being kind of, quite quick and proportionate. So performance is going up the more we practice. But the bit we kind of want to focus our time on is that between, let's say, I can't remember what it was now, the 50th and the 100th trial, what's happening here is that learning is plateauing off. So this is what we mean by a plateau. So we're basically saying, tough spelling in it, plateau. We're basically saying, look, despite ongoing trials, time, effort, engagement, despite that, learning and performance is not improving. So why? We're simply going to ask the why question. Why wouldn't it improve in this section? First of all, we're saying the performer is not physically capable. I mean, it's a bit harsh, isn't it? This is actually called the law of Thorndike's law of readiness. Okay, so we're going to talk about that quite a bit here. So the performer is just not physically capable. It could be, that we've at this point here, we've gone from a turbo javelin to an 800 gram, 2 meter long javelin with 9-year-olds. They just can't get it over their head, okay, and lob it forward, right? So it's not the right thing. That
obviously could lead to the task being too difficult. Now, of course, this is going to relate really closely to goal setting, and particularly the achievability and the realism. Is it a realistic target that we're being asked of this person? Again, it links back to Thorndike's law of readiness. Are they physically and mentally capable? Now, remind yourself what ability means. We're actually saying here is that this individual, this is their peak performance. They're just not going to get any better than this. Okay, this is what they can do. Ability is a predetermined kind of capacity. It's innate. It's biological. It relates to limb length, lever strength. It relates to levels of ability-based coordination. That's as high as they're going to get. That could be another reason. I don't like to think. It's not a very useful thing to think from a coaching perspective, because it becomes an excuse, right? Oh, that then, despite my terrible coaching, they're not learning because they're not good enough. Well, no, it's more likely that it's in the coaching environment. Something we should bear in mind. Have they reached their full potential? Is this performance here as high as they're ever going to go? If it is, then we need to introduce other skills or other ways of competing, or whatever it happens to be. It could be that they're lacking fitness. It could be, this is a lovely point, the mental model of the skill is not fully formed. So whatever that kind of mental picture, image, really important to our cognitive stage learners, of course, it's not being built effectively, and they can't therefore continue learning off the base of that weak foundation. What about if they're bored? It's a lack of motivation. Now, I really want to introduce you here. And yeah, I know, teachers, it's not a theory named on the course, but this is about drive reduction theory. Now, drive reduction theory, we don't teach it on AQA A-Level, but I'm just going to tell you because it's absolutely fundamental and absolutely will appear on a mark scheme, never mind on a spec. But what we're saying here is that we've got to set our goals accurately. And when people achieve those goals, we've got to move those goals on and set new ones. That's it. That's all that means. You can simply write setting new goals, new challenges. That's all drive reduction theory is. Poor quality coaching and teaching. Look, if we don't teach them properly, of course, they're going to plateau because they've got nowhere to go with it. Now, we're going to focus on the solutions. Right, we want to introduce difficult tasks after mastery. So we master basics, go back to our things like our fixed to variable practice environment. We master, then we move it on. We must have achievable goals, more of which in a second. We must set individual rather than team goals, or both. So it's not just that the team has to produce something, but individual knows what they're individually responsible for and working towards. We should work on fitness so people can do this. Use drive reduction theory to set appropriate goals. So if somebody achieves the goal, set another goal which continues the challenge. Ensure coaching is high quality. That could go on coaching courses. Learn your stuff, mate. Know what your coaching points are. Use demonstrations to provide mental model. So really important from this perspective here, the mental model of the skill. Use whole, part, whole. So this is a really nice place. So the key thing with whole, part, whole, folks, is it's really good for error detection. So of course we haven't talked about this in this session, but whole, part, whole practice that method can really lead to good error detection, and therefore we've got correct errors in subroutines, and therefore error detection, error correction. So what have we got here? We've got the causes of plateau, we've got the solutions, shortening, how to prevent a plateau. Now, of course, it would be so much better to have these things in place and there's not a plateau, right? And therefore we can build it that way. Now, we're going to talk about our paper 2 content and paper 1, the importance of goal setting. Can I please urge you to be familiar with the distinctions between these 3 terms? I'm actually going to start on the right because it's by far the easiest place to start. An outcome goal, what is it? Often long term. We're interested in the end result. Did we win? Did we lose? Did we make the final? Did we get a medal? Did we get on the podium? All that kind of stuff. Was I selected for the first team after a season of working in the youths or whatever it happens to be? Typically not controllable. So outcome goals are almost universally affected by others, a coach selecting us or not. Going and running my PB in the 100-meter sprint final at the Olympics, but someone else blinking well runs it faster. What are you going to do? You can run, go back 6 or 7 years. You can run 9.7 seconds and Bolt's still beating you, mate, because he's running 9.6. Okay, so there's other things that are not controllable for you. Goals that statistically are least likely, and this is an important point. Outcome goals, they're not controllable. Their end result, we've got all kinds of processes to go through before then. Therefore, they are less likely to occur. That doesn't mean they don't occur, but they're far less controllable. Now, this is where I want to now get into our controllability factor with our process and performance. Now, we must be able to distinguish these. Process goals, technique-based, folks. They are technical. They do not involve comparison with others. They often involve comparison to yourself. They are internal and stable attribution. Look at the links that we're making to our other theory. There is synoptic in its nature. Internal and stable attribution means things such as, oh, my first serve percentage wasn't that great today because I didn't throw the ball high enough, or it's too high. That's responsibility of me, the performer. I'm in control of it, and I can change it for the very next performance. Internal and stable attribution leads to that kind of mastery orientation, that confidence of performer. Very controllable, build confidence, and good use of drive reduction theory. What we mean by this is we get ongoing and repeated goal setting. Okay, so because we know exactly how our technique is performing, we can keep setting small achievable goals off the back of that. Now, performance goals are very similar, but they're different. They're often related to a personal best. So now I'm not looking at the height of the ball toss of my serve. I'm looking specifically at what was the percentage of points won in this particular practice session match off my first serve, and how does that relate to my best? I'm doing it that way. It's a personal standard, still no social comparison, and again, it's largely controllable. So a performance goal is all about your personal best. So think about it. Classic would be, I run my 800-meter race and I run it in, this has never happened, and I run it in 2 minutes 7 seconds. I once ran it in 2:15, which I thought was all right, but I ran it in 2 minutes 7 seconds, and that's my personal best. I still finished 7th in the race, but I was happy with that performance. Why? Because I'm judging myself by my performance goals, and I've reached the standard that I was looking to reach. Okay, so we must be able to distinguish those three goals. And then, of course, if we now get onto our goal setting, there's all kinds of things that we can cover here. And I'm sure you guys are very, very confident with this particular. Let me make sure I've got my... I had the wrong document open with my notes. I'm sure you guys are really, really familiar with these sort of notions, but I want to go through some things with you that I think would sort of like drive it home in essence, folks, okay? So first of all, when we're talking about the specific nature of goals, we're talking about things, let me just find it here. We're talking about things such as being specific to, this could be to a component of fitness. So of course we can, I'll start that again because I've done that from Measurable. Specific could mean that we make our goal specific to our components at fitness. So I'm going to work on agility because I'm a badminton player. It could, of course, relate to skill. I'm going to work on my pendulum serve in table tennis, which is the most crucial shot. It could relate to area of the body. I'm going to work on shoulder strength because I'm a javelin thrower. It could relate to energy system. Obviously, this starts leading into the physiology, but I'm going to work on that because I'm an anaerobic performer like a javelin thrower. And the really, really important thing here is that we state the intended outcome, more of which in a second when we look at measurability outcome. Now, our measurability is a little different. I'll do it here. Our measurability, couple of things we want here. We want whatever we are doing to be objectively assessed. Okay, so this goal is either going to be achieved or failed because we have got a direct measure. Now, we're also going to have a timescale, which I'll come back to in a second. And these are going to be things like scores, heights. It could be things like weights. You know, think about things like 1 rep max fitness test result. It could be things like times. Think about personal best, something like that. It could obviously be fitness test scores. Now, achievability, very much like realism, by the way, it needs to be challenging but achievable. So our goal must be both challenging but achievable. Now, challenging could be something that's impossible to achieve, right? Well, we're not accepting that. It's got to be just at arm's length. In fact, let me put that in here, just at arm's reach. Not literally, but the goal is tantalizing. It's there. I know I can get there. I know I can do it, and I've got to do a little bit more to do so. And of course, this has got to relate to the time phasing. Okay, so how achievable it is and how realistic it is, it relates to the time phasing. Now let's go further. Let's to our realistic. I could really just say read above, to be perfectly honest with you, with realistic. In fact, I'm going to say see above. I mean, achievable and realistic, I really don't know why they put both of these in an acronym, because they basically mean the same thing in this concept. I'm going to just repeat this point about time phasing. Something is realistic because it's been well time phased. More of which right now, because we're now going to look at time-bound, time phasing, this sort of notion. So first of all, the time scale should be specific. So we're going to improve my first serve percentage within 6 weeks from today. Okay, absolutely essential. And it's really important Because the timing relates directly to the achievable factor. Okay, is it realistic? Is it achievable to do what we've set out in, let's say, 6 weeks? Now, to evaluate, nice and simple, this particular one, when we're talking about evaluating, we must measure and remeasure. So our goals must be measured specifically, already covered the specific nature, measure and remeasure. And then what we do is we look to achieve further, and then we measure again. Now, I've already touched on this redo one. Again, same sort of notion here, redo. And what we're talking about here is we are repeat goal setting. You can't just set a goal, achieve, and go, oh, that'll do. No, we set it again and again and again, and we keep that challenge. Now, again, I've mentioned this 2 or 3 times already today. This relates to our drive reduction theory, because the more sort of sensitive we are to goal setting, and the more we set something which is highly accurate, specific, and relevant to the individual, then the more motivated they're going to be. Now, I guess this is the big moment. I don't know. I'm not predicting this is going to be your question, but I think it could be close. I've gone for analyse, which remembers to break into parts and explain the reasons a badminton player might experience a learning plateau. So we've got here the why. Why is this happening? Can I just remind you, all that is that stuff there, the causes. So we've got why is the learning plateau happening, and the possible solutions. We've got that right next to it in the column up above, right? And a coach could implement to shorten this experience. Incorporate your knowledge of the principles of effective goal setting to support your answer. So look, in essence, folks, we've got that to break down and explain, that to break down and explain, and we've got this to break down and explain within the context of badminton coaching. Okay, so let's go through. The badminton player may not be physically capable, straight from the table above, perform the required skill. This is called law of readiness. Now, this is a link here, folks. This is Thorndike's law of readiness. An example might be, again, linking it from my AO2 into badminton, that their shoulder is not flexible enough to play a backhand clear. To address this, a coach could lower the net or use a lighter racket or slower shuttle to help the learner. It could be the task. So effectively, you see what we've done there? We've gone, in essence, we've gone from what the problem is to what the problem would look like in badminton to how we could solve it. We're breaking down and explaining. Another example, it could be that the task is too difficult. Coach needs to address this by introducing difficulty gradually and ensuring core skills are mastered before moving on. For example, ensuring that a long serve is consistent before introducing a flick serve. So clear links. So I've got, in this case, I've gone cause, solution, example. Here, another reason is goals might not be realistic. I think that's meant to say if a coach asks a novice player to play a singles match, they may not be ready. Instead, the coach must make the goal specific to the individual concern and always within their reach in order for the plateau to be shortened. The goal must be, did you see how we're now going into incorporating our knowledge of goal setting? The goal must also be measurable. Okay, so we've got this sort of notion here, that measurability from our SMART principle, and be treated as objective. So the coach could set a target to reduce unforced errors by 10%. Notice I've got measurability into my example. The goals must be time bound, again straight from my SMART, so the player knows they have 4 weeks to achieve it. This will help with motivation, especially if the goal is the right balance of challenging and realistic. Again, achievability, realism. The goal must also be evaluated straight from SMARTers so that the player can objectively know if the plateau is over. Finally, for goal setting, goals must be set again and again, redoing them to keep the performer motivated. The player may actually, now we're going back into causes, the player may lack the ability, I said it was a bit harsh earlier, such as underdeveloped hand-eye coordination. In this case, the coach must go back to basics and even work on the fundamentals of movement skills to help the performer. It could be that the player has reached their full potential already, and for example, they will just not hit the smash harder than they do right now. In this case, the coach could ensure the player plays against the right opponents for their level. They've reached their potential to maximise their game. It could even be that the player is just fatigued or lacking fitness. A lack of agility and reaction time as examples. In this case, the coach could work on fitness with the player. It might be that the player is bored as they're always doing the same drills again and again. In this case, the coach must apply the drive reduction theory and continually reset challenges for the player. Finally, it could be that the coaching is poor quality and the coach does not know the subroutines of a flick serve, in which case they must improve their own coaching knowledge by a relevant coaching course looking to support them. Now, folks, we believe that's a very, very, very strong answer. I'd really like you to focus on the link to badminton in that answer. can you draw out, I mean, go through the answer and draw out the specific nature of the links. Now, you might actually find those places you could have improved. That's wonderful if you can do that, okay? But link to badminton. Yes, we've analysed, we've broken down, we've gone through the causes, gone through the solutions, gone through the links to badminton. We've also gone through the goal-setting principle and built that into our answer. Now, you might want to just sort of realise here that what we actually did in that answer is, as we were going through the causes in our answer, we sort of picked up things like goals were not achievable and realistic, and then we brought all of the smarter in that middle part of the answer. It doesn't have to be that in this case you do the smarter at the end. You can, but you don't want to just bolt this on the end. I try to build it into the answer in that way. Anyway, I think more than anything, you guys need to have a go answering that yourselves. You guys need to look over the mark schemes. You guys need to look at the answer that I've produced, see what you think of that, and yeah, hope that's useful.
And we're back, eventually. Sorry about that, press the wrong button. Marta, any thoughts, any questions?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. First question, is mental practice still needed under types of practice?
Yes, and that's a good question as well, to be honest, because I actually meant to do a little bit more on that. You know, this section we did on distributed practice earlier, I meant to do an extra little chunk there, which was sort of basically looking, obviously we're stopping there for mental processes, mental practice, that sort of thing. We're just looking at a bit of nature of what that is. So I'll tell you what's the best way to do this. I'll tell you what we'll do. If I just let me get hold of something. Okay, so folks, this is the key information when it comes to mental practice. Now, I'm sorry, this is not a super exciting document, okay? But if you have a look here, basically with our mental practice, what we're saying here is that we use visualization during distributed practice. I'll actually put that in there, distributed practice. And we do it for the following reasons. We do it to understand the skill requirements. We do it to visualize fault correction. We do it to activate nerve impulses. We do it for selective attention. We do it because images are remembered better. Now, this actually relates to something called Craig and Lockhart's levels of processing model. But this here, basically what we're saying here is that if a coach is given instructions, then it's better remembered if the performer also visualizes what they're required to do. It puts confidence up, it decreases arousal. Okay, so that in essence, that's what we're looking for with regard to mental practice. I'll just leave that up there for a moment while you guys have a bit of a think about that. Perhaps note that down, and I would strongly recommend you go and put that section into your notes. Now, this document here, guys, is proper boring. I don't never use this to show to anyone really. This is in essence just my notes on every single topic. Here you see cognitive learning and feedback, stage of learning, associative and feedback. So that it's that kind of stuff that I build to help me teach this stuff. So that bunch there is what you should be looking to answer on your mental practice. And while people write that down, Marsh, I'll see if there's any other questions.
Yeah. There aren't any other questions.
Oh.
The other question was basically the same
question.
question.
Same one?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Phrased differently, but it was the same.
Okay.
Whether mental practice was needed.
Okay, well, as people note those down, I'll click off the screen and come back on in a second. But what I did want to say before we finish this afternoon is that tomorrow's session on sport in society is not as broad as the skill acquisition and the applied anatomy and physiology. And what I mean by that, there's actually less to cover. So in the session tomorrow, we're anticipating it being in the region of a 35 to 40 minute session. So I just wanted you to know that, teachers, just be aware of it in case you're getting groups together. If you are, just bear in mind that any kind of pickup, lifts home, that kind of stuff, it's got to be around about a 40 minute session, we believe. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And I think everyone's probably got that down on their sheets. So I'll come back onto the camera. And yeah, I think otherwise we're going to say we're going to see you all tomorrow. Marta, we're about to go and have some dinner. I can smell it off there. I believe it might be
Thai curry.
A bit of a homemade red Thai curry with prawns and mange too. Yeah. Homemade red Thai curry paste. It's got the shrimp paste in there. It's got the galangal. What else has it got in there?
You don't want to smell it too closely.
You don't want to smell it too closely. It's pretty pungent, but it's authentic, and we're going to go much. It's got we believe 36 red chilies in it, so it's got a bit of twang to him. So we're going to go and do that now. So if there are no more questions, Marta,
no more questions. We're
going to sign off. Wish you a great afternoon. We're delighted to have got that done in a good hour session. That's 2 sessions back to back for us. So we're going to go and have a massive rest with red curry. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.